Hi everyone, and welcome to UTech's podcast. I'm Lenny, a principal at UTech, and I will be your host today. Today, our guest is Gerald Mullally, the CEO of OQC, Oxford Quantum Circuits, and Atsushi Sugiura-san, who is leading OQC's expansion here in Japan. So, Gerald, would you go first and introduce your background and your journey to OQC?
Thank you, Lenny. Firstly, really delighted to be involved in this podcast and looking forward to the conversation. I'm Gerald. I'm the CEO of Oxford Quantum Circuits, OQC, a globally leading quantum computing company. We're going to dive into lots about OQC a little bit later on. But my background more generally, I've been with OQC about 2.5 years now. Prior to this, I was actually a director in the UK Prime Minister's office, mainly on the national security side. And before that, in Accenture and PwC. I think my journey more generally is I started in consulting, started helping businesses to explore and then kind of change the way in which they did business through technology, moved into the national security world and understood the real importance of technological threats and the importance of technology for protecting national security more generally. And really privileged and delighted to now be CEO of a globally leading quantum computing company.
That's great, and I'm very excited. Okay, now Atsushi Sugiura-san, could you please introduce yourself and what brought you into OQC?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, you can call me Atsushi, please.
Atsushi,
Yeah,
okay.
I joined OQC about 2 years ago as
Mhm.
the company started operation in Japan. But before that, I was in Silicon Valley for about 20 years. I moved to the Silicon Valley at the height of the dot-com booms, so you can guess how old I am. But I really enjoyed working in Silicon Valley as the internet falls out over this course of 20 years. And when I met OQC, I jumped on the opportunity. I believe that quantum computing or the quantum technologies have the potential to change the world,
Mm.
as internet has done to the general computing world. And also, it was more exciting for me to actually build a team in Japan from scratch. So
Mhm.
that's how I ended up with this position at OQC.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to have the privilege to work closely with OQC. So let's get started to the first question. And I think most people are wondering, what is quantum computing?
If we imagine I'm trying to explain quantum computing to, let's say, my grandmother, as an example, right? The starting point would be, Grandma, it's a fundamentally new type of compute. And she would look at me completely blankly. She would not understand what I'm talking about. But she used
Okay.
to love to go for walks. She would go for walks in kind of beautiful gardens and so on. And I'm imagining her kind of explaining to her, she's going for a walk in a beautiful garden and she
Mhm.
comes across a giant garden maze. And you know those mazes with all the hedges and you're trying to find your path through, and there's multiple paths in the maze that you can take. And a classical computer is like my grandma trying to every single path one by one in that maze. It's methodical, but it's
Mhm.
incredibly slow. And the complexity of the maze means that actually, if it's a really complex maze, it will take probably a very long time, or it will be impossible for my grandma to find the right route through that maze. So, a quantum computer, on the other hand, is like having thousands of versions of grandma exploring all possible paths at the same time. And then when one version of my grandma finds the right path, all other versions collapse to that single grandma who's found the solution. I know that's really hard to imagine and to understand, but it is the incredible properties of superposition, which means that instead of choosing just one path at a time, each quantum bit or qubit can explore multiple possibilities at once. It's as if each version of grandma is trying a different route in parallel. So there's thousands or maybe millions of grandma trying multiple paths in parallel. But then the real
Mm.
magic is those versions of grandma, they're not just wandering the maze randomly. This is something called entanglement. All the versions of grandma are connected deeply. So if one version of grandma finds the exit, all other versions instantly know. And the whole group of grandmas
Mm.
collapses to just the successful version of grandma, and she
Wow.
walks right out of the maze. And that's the two fundamental properties of superposition, which lets quantum computers explore enormous number of possibilities at once. And then entanglement is what keeps those possibilities connected. So when the right solution appears, the system immediately locks onto that solution and she's free of the maze and she goes enjoys the rest of her walk.
Yeah, I'm very amazed by that story. So it's different version from all the other versions I heard from.
Well, I had to
Thank
explain
you.
it to Grandma. She needed a simple explanation. So hopefully that worked.
Thank
And
you.
she's safe and sound. She made it out of the garden.
So I think one question that a lot of people asking now is like how far away are we from the first useful applications with quantum computing? Some people say maybe 5 years, some people say 10 years. And what do you think? What's your opinion?
Yeah, this is a really good question. We get this
Mm,
question asked a lot.
okay.
And I think that the reason why there is so many maybe different answers to this
Mm,
is that people are talking about the different applications that are unlocked depending on the power of the quantum computer that exists. So
mm,
if you imagine today, we can run thousands of quantum operations without
mm,
an error occurring, but only thousands. And that's
mm,
today. The real advantage will come when quantum computers can run first millions of quantum operations
mm,
before an error occurs,
mm,
and that will unlock specific applications in specific sectors. This is called narrow advantage, and we
mm,
expect that advantage to occur by 2028. So that's
mm.
not far away at all. But those kind of
Wow.
applications that we're talking about is only millions of quantum operations before error takes over. And there are areas like fraud detection in financial services,
Mm,
arbitrage also in financial services. You've got threat detection
mm,
in security or cybersecurity, and you've got vulnerability analysis, which is a really good one for security in addition. There are four applications that when we have a quantum system that can
mm,
run millions of quantum operations
mm,
before an error occurs, we will actually move past the capabilities of classical compute for
mm,
those specific applications. Now, that's
mm,
still known as narrow advantage. It's not
mm,
broad advantage and it's not full advantage. The next milestone that we're all heading towards, once we get to millions of quantum operations, is billions of quantum operations. And that will unlock advantage in things like derivative pricing in financial services or
mm,
deep hedging in financial services. These are much larger, higher value use cases that could have a fundamental impact for the financial services industry. To get to billions of quantum operations, that's probably about 2031. But at that stage, we move past the capabilities of classical compute for those specific applications. And then the big one is when we move into trillions of quantum operations. And that's when you unlock value in a huge number of sectors, including pharmaceuticals, battery simulations, definitely more in terms of the financial services sector. And there could be more transformational impacts on our society at that point. Almost as well, and this is an important one, each era of compute tends to unlock fundamentally new categories of economic value that we can't even conceptualize today. And that's likely to occur at the trillions of quantum operations. At that era, you're truly in fault tolerant quantum compute. We hit that era as OQC in 2034. So they're the kind of three big milestones of millions, billions, and trillions of quantum operations. So when people have different views, and some people will say it's within the next 3 to 4 years, and other people say, no, 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 it's within the next 8, 9, or 10 years, technically, they're both right. They're just
mm.
talking about different applications unlocking different pockets of value. Now, overall, and this is a big one, by 2035, we will unlock $2 trillion of value across
Mhm,
all sectors.
mhm.
That's the size of the economic prize that exists for quantum. And I think it's why so many governments, and we'll talk about Japan later, are really strategically prioritizing quantum compute for their economies, for their ecosystems, to ensure that they can capture some part of that $2 trillion of value globally.
So maybe within 3 years, we're gonna see something that's impact to be realized by quantum computing. And could you describe more a concrete example of what kind of use cases we are gonna see with quantum computing, which can not be done with classical computing?
Yeah, that's a really Great question. I think a really good use case that kind of help understand the potential of quantum is in drug discovery. So if you take, let's talk about my grandma again. She is in the later age or later stages of her life, and she'll need certain types of medication more generally. What's probably not understood is the cost of bringing just one drug to market and the time involved is $2.6 billion and 12 to 15 years just to bring one drug to market. And the reason is it's a story of failure. 90, 95, 99% of potential drugs fail during the trial and error processes that exist. And the reason for that goes back to the very starting point. At present, it is not possible to model or simulate molecular interactions on a classical computer. They're too complex. The maze is too complex for the classical computer. And on that basis, what actually is happening is those molecular interactions, by their very nature, are quantum mechanical. And on that basis, you need a quantum computer to be able to simulate or model those molecular interactions precisely, and on that basis being able to design a drug that is far better at treating that illness or that disease. You can then choose the most efficacious design of your drug and put that design into the trial and error processes. And what the potential of this is that currently intractable diseases like cancer, etc., become curable because of the work of a quantum computer and the brilliant quantum chemists and chemists more generally that are working on this problem set. That shortens the amount of time and vastly lowers the cost of drug discovery. And that's one example. A very quick second example for it in a completely different domain would be something like fraud detection. There's an algorithm that currently has been created by HSBC that gives a 15% increase in the detection of fraud over the best classical algorithms. And that's a quantum algorithm that currently is in existence. Now, the challenge is we need a quantum computer that is able to run millions of quantum operations to be able to run that algorithm so that we can then better identify fraud. But that 15% increase is about £1 billion of fraud each year in the UK. That would return about 150 million immediately to the UK economy. And more importantly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people would not have to suffer the pain of fraud. That's the power of quantum, both in the healthcare sector and also in financial services.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving such a concrete use cases example. I think that definitely help us to understand how it could be useful. Here is my question to Atsushi. So you're leading the OQC's expansion effort in Japan. When you're talking to Japanese customers or partners, how would you explain quantum computing in a way that resonates with those partners?
I think that similar story that Gerald gave really actually resonate with those people who are interested in this technology. But if we expand the audience a little bit wider, meaning that who may be not really knowing about the quantum computing itself, I usually say that quantum computing is truly a new way of doing computing. It's not the fundamental. It's not the the same as your PC or the phone or the servers would work because it's fundamentally different. So the things you haven't actually imagined would be possible. So that's the sort of magnitude of the potential this technology has. So for those people maybe old enough to know how internet actually flourished over the course of the decade or so, people didn't really think you can have this kind of online meeting back in 80s. So those are the possibilities that quantum computing has. So that actually opens many of people's eye. Okay, then that's something really interesting.
Thank you very much. Now I want to talk about here your perspective on OQC's origin and how it started. So to Gerald, could you tell me like some of the earlier dates at OQC?
Yeah, so we were established in 2017, and as you mentioned, we're a spin out from the University of Oxford. Our founder is a quantum computing pioneer, Dr. Peter Leak, and he recognized a kind of a critical truth in the field. The current architectures that existed at that stage, so almost almost forced a trade-off between three critical aspects: speed, quality, and scale. Without all of these three, quantum couldn't move from the academic promise to practical, real business value. And what Peter's breakthrough was in a fundamentally new architecture for quantum. It's known as the coaxmon, and it's a 3D superconducting qubit design that for the first time made it possible to deliver high speed, high fidelity or high quality operations, importantly, at scale. And from this single innovation, OQC was born with the mission not just to kind of prove the theory, but to build an architecture that would really support businesses globally to solve problems that they historically would never have been able to solve. We now have an architecture that is effectively the fastest in the world, 25 nanoseconds, at an incredibly high fidelity or quality, 99.8% two-qubit fidelity. And then lastly, we have a scalability whereby we are the only ones that are able to demonstrate that we can put 50,000 logical qubits, 1 million physical qubits on a single wafer in a single system in a single data center cage. And that makes it possible for us to imagine a future whereby we've got quantum computers in every data center in the world serving customers as per classical compute. And I think that's an extraordinary possibility for us. We went from the first commercially available quantum computer in the UK, the first quantum computer as a service company in Europe, the first company in the world to integrate quantum into co-location or commercial data centers. We've now expanded to Japan, as we'll talk through. Later this year, we'll be the first quantum computer in New York City. And in addition, we've got a number of systems serving customers from our UK headquarters just outside of London. So we've expanded internationally. We're in a great pace as a company, and fundamentally, it all comes from the architecture that Peter invented in 2017.
I think, yes, you mentioned about the architecture behind OQC, coaxmon, which is the most important core technology here. Could you describe it a little bit more, like how is it so intriguing that we have this such competitive core technology?
If you look at, some of our competitors and some of the chips that they have, it's a two-dimensional design. And what that means is the kind of wiring that they have is bonded to the chip, in plane with the chip. So if you imagine a chip and you imagine wiring that kind of fans out to the edge of the chip. Now, as you increase the number of qubits, which we need to do, you increase the number of wires. And as you increase the number of wires, if your wires are in plane with the chip and fanning out to the edge of the chip, the perimeter of that chip becomes a limiting factor as you scale. In addition, because the wires are in plane with the chip, imagine rolling a tennis ball across a table. It hits things on the table. In other words, the signal moving across the chip tends to interfere with other parts of the chip. What we've designed and what Peter has designed and patented is a three-dimensional approach. So you imagine the wires are out of plane, above and below the chip. And on that basis, we aren't impacted by the perimeter of the chip. And secondly, and really importantly, it's like dropping a tennis ball through a hole in the table. It does not hit things on the table. And on that basis, we end up with a much simpler architecture, a much better architecture, and importantly, a much more scalable architecture. And that's the potential of our chip. And we're really seeing that as we go through a number of generations of systems. So we're actually now on to the fourth generation of system at OQC. We've successfully delivered 3 already.
Thank you. This is a question to Atsushi. So OQC expanded to Japan at a relatively early stage, and Japan is their first overseas entity outside of the UK. How do you see the opportunities in Japan? And what was the first thing that you did when you began setting up the Japanese branch, OQC Japan?
Okay, I'll go the second question first. So
Okay.
the thing I did when I joined the company was kind of stand up on the stage to announce that OQC is coming to Japan and, installing the system in the Equinix data center in Ariake. That was my 4 weeks into the job, and then I really needed to
Right into the deep end, Atsushi, right in there.
Yeah, I really needed to learn quickly. The reason I think, OQC decided to come to Japan is multiple reasons. UTech being as our investor, kind of, opening our eye to the Japan is certainly one big reason. But besides, I think Japan is actually very well established region when it comes to the quantum academics. In academia world, as you understand, the things has been really studied and researched in Japan deeply. And first implementation of those qubits came out of Japan and things like that. So I do believe that the OQC did recognize this deep rooted technology in Japan as an opportunity for us to actually grow, especially in the Asian market or the Asian time zone, if we try to cover the world. Also, I think the very strong commitment by the government was really a good sort of a indicator that the market will grow in Japan significantly, especially with the longer term commitment by the government investments. That's really, I think, made OQC decide to come to Japan.
Thank you so much. What kind of business opportunities do you see will happen in Japan going forward?
Yes, obviously, Japan has a very large economy, the third in the world, still, with the range of industries thriving, most notably in manufacturing, and the industry is very strong. So there are a lot of opportunities in the manufacturing industries. Also, Japan is a very well-established financial center in the world. So financial services sector is another. Chemistry, material science, those are very, very strong field in Japan too. So all those sort of a variety of industry segments will have an opportunity to adopt this quantum technology. So I'm really actually looking forward to tap on those opportunities with the likes of partners in Japan as well as customers.
Thank you so much. And this will be my last question for this episode to both of you, Gerald and Atsushi. What kind of advice would you like to give for people who are interested in joining this space of quantum computing? For example, students or engineers or even people with working experience are interested in joining these fields?
I think firstly, get involved is a huge recommendation to anyone who's kind of looking at quantum and thinking about potentially doing it. Do it. It is the most exciting sector. There's clearly a huge wave that's occurring. It's the right time to get in to the sector. It's growing. There are lots of opportunities, and importantly, there are opportunities across a range of different skill sets. So there's obviously quantum engineers that are required, that those have a background in quantum. There's also, technical engineers, there's software engineer requirements. There's also the business side, which is growing really heavily, everything from marketing to commercial skill sets. So I think it's definitely the right time to get involved. And I wouldn't be while quantum on the surface can seem quite complex and it can seem, oh, I'll never be able to do that, it's too hard. Try it. Get involved, you'll learn, you'll pick it up. There's lots of people that are entering the sector that don't have a background in quantum, and on that basis they're able to learn. Once they'll learn on the job, and you'll pick up enough to be able to have a really successful career in the quantum industry. But my strong recommendation is it's very exciting. It's clearly there's something happening here, and it's probably the start of something hugely revolutionary and transformative. Why wouldn't you want to be involved in it?
That's exciting. Okay, do you have anything, Atsushi?
The only thing that I can add is the earlier you join, the broader the opportunities.
Thank you. With that, let's wrap up first half of our conversation today. So I hope it's been as insightful for you as it has for me. And in the next episode, we'll go deeper into how OQC and UTech are working together and where the quantum ecosystem is headed from here. So see you there in episode 2.